Welcome to the Toshokan. Today's inaugural video will be on Genzaburo Yoshino's 1937 novel, Kimitachi wa Dou Ikiru ka, finally translated as How Do You Live by Bruno Navasky in 2021. My motive for reading Kimitachi wa Dou Ikiru ka was the same as that of many Japanese. Hayao Miyazaki was so influenced by this book that he chose to name Studio Ghibli's newest film after it, going so far as to use the same font styling from the novel in the poster for the film. The mere announcement of this new film in 2017 propelled the manga version of Kimitachi wa Dou Ikiru ka to become Japan's best-selling book in 2018, during which time I must admit its protagonist and I met eyes many times, him staring at me from the shelf of a tsutaya or book-off, and I staring at him from within the skull of a perpetual dekinai, having the ability to probably stumble my way through the manga version, but lacking the Japanese parsing abilities to enjoyably comprehend its contents. Although at the time, I just thought he looked a bit too much like Harry Potter. So why did I find myself reading Kimitachi wa Dou Ikiru ka in 2023, a whole 5 years later than the 2018 81-year belated Miyazaki-induced fever? Because much like my hopes to spectate the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in person were dashed by either the love of exotic cuisine or humans playing God, my hopes to see a Studio Ghibli film while it was premiering in Japanese theatres were dashed by my leaving the country at the beginning of this year. And so, in an attempt to prevent myself from becoming an eiga dorobo, I made sure to bring a copy of Iwanami's 1982 republishing of the book in my luggage to tide me over until the film's international release, lest I be chased down by Siren Head's luminous brothers and share a fate similar to that of the author of Kimitachi wa Dou Ikiru ka, who was, for a time, imprisoned for his political leanings. The work was originally a collaboration with Yamamoto Yuzo, but after he began having problems with his sight, Genzaburo Yoshino took over. So let's get to the meat of it. For those of you worried about spoilers, have no fear. It has been stated that although Ghibli's new film shares the same name as the book, it will be its own story, with elements of the usual Ghibli fantasy. This being said, I think at least partial knowledge of the book, its themes and characters might give one the ability to enjoy the new film on another level, being able to look out for references and homages. So here we go. The story focuses on Junichi Honda, a vertically challenged boy in the second grade of middle school. We are told early in the book that most people forgo using his given name, instead referring to him as Kopperu-kun, or, in the 2020 English translation, Copper. We are soon illuminated as to why he was given this nickname by his uncle, as it is central to the story. When Kopperu-kun was in the first grade of middle school, he went to Tokyo with his uncle, and they stood together on the roof of a department store. It was then that Kopperu-kun had a realization, while staring down at the people and cars coming and going, and at the many tall buildings. He realized that each person is like a drop of water, or water molecule, parts of a whole, but individual, living their own lives. Kopperu-kun's attention is drawn to a boy riding a bicycle who has a near miss with a motor vehicle. Kopperu-kun realizes that the boy's path intersected with the path that his uncle and he had taken some moments earlier, and wonders if at that time someone else was looking down at them from where they now stood. His uncle watches Kopperu-kun as he stares out into the city, and Genzaburo Yoshino's prose delicately describes the motions of the young boy's mind. We are then presented with an oji-san note, a kind of journal entry written by Kopperu-kun's uncle addressed to Kopperu-kun, but not yet given to him. His uncle writes that he is proud that Kopperu-kun has become able to think about such things. He affirms that just as Kopperu-kun realized while on that rooftop, that each person is a small part of the larger, wider world. It is here that we learn that the reason his uncle starts calling him Kopperu-kun is the similarity Koperu-kun's realization is to that of Copernicus's heliocentric theory, the idea that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and not vice versa. His uncle states that before we are able to think in the manner that Koperu-kun has started to think, we tend to think from ourselves outward. That shop is 2 kilometers from my house. That place is down the road from my school. And that we also tend to think the same way when it comes to people. That person works with my father. That person is my mother's friend. When people become adults, they become able to think in a less self-centric manner. This, however, his uncle explains, is only a generalization, and that there are still plenty of adults who have not yet made this jump. He goes so far as to say it is rare, that those admirable people who can think similarly to Copernicus are few, and to make the correct decision, irrespective of oneself, is a difficult task indeed. Here, some 80 years prior, Genzaburo Yoshino gave us the definition of what would later be condensed down into one name: Karen. Perhaps by now, well-worn advice, but it's still a good point. As much as we could sometimes wish ourselves another person, we are permanently and irrevocably, from our own vantage points, the relative center of the universe. That's a physical certainty that we have to fight against when making decisions. Koperu-kun's uncle ends the note by stressing the importance of the ideas and thoughts that Koperu-kun has expressed. This back and forth between slice of life and letters to Koperu-kun from his uncle ruminating on the events we read about continues for the rest of the book, and makes up the entire structure of the narrative. While reading it, I found it felt similar to Brady Mikako's 2019 book, I'm Yellow, White, and a Little Blue, a book in which Brady Mikako recounts her son's experiences and conversations that they have about those experiences while living in Britain, which in retrospect I'm sure was at least somewhat inspired by the success that the manga version of Kimitachi wa Doikiruka had the prior year, and which enjoyed similar popularity. Kimitachi wa Doikiruka presents several somewhat self-contained stories, but builds to a bigger climax later in the novel. The second chapter introduces 2 of Koperu-kun's classmates, the hothead Kitami, or Gachin, and Urakawa. This chapter sees Kitami wailing on a boy called Yamaguchi after he bullies Urakawa for always smelling like aburage, a fried Japanese food often coupled with udon. In a later chapter, we learn that Urakawa always smells of aburage due to him making it while working at his parents' business, as they are quite poor and need all the help that they can get. The teacher breaks up the fight, and Kitami and the bully Yamaguchi are held back during the lunch break. Koperu-kun and Urakawa wait for Kitami, and are reassured by his smile when he eventually joins them out in the school field. When Koperu-kun's uncle hears of the events of that school day, he writes another entry in his notebook to Koperu-kun. He is pleased that his nephew sympathized with Urakawa and Kitami, and not the likes of the bully Yamaguchi, like some other students did. Here it is revealed that Koperu-kun's father called his uncle to his bedside 3 days before he passed away, to entrust him with the task of ensuring that Koperu-kun becomes a fine young man. This is a recurring subject of the book, his uncle touching on it many times. His uncle tells him that it is not something easily taught, and that such a disposition, such an outlook on life has to come from within, and that's what it feels like. His uncle is not so much lecturing, but more adding commentary and an older, wiser perspective to Koperu-kun's experiences. His uncle is praising him for his realizations. It's very much a yes and. The other chapters of the book see us following Koperu-kun as he goes to his classmate Urakawa's home to check in on him after he's absent from school for several days. It turns out that he is absent not because of illness, but because he is helping run the family restaurant, while his father is away trying to gather capital from extended family. It is a picture of a family doing it tough. Koperu-kun's uncle tells him that Urakawa is a very admirable person, as he is contributing to producing something for the world, and somewhat comically draws a comparison between Urakawa and Koperu-kun, who, at the moment, in his words, is doing nothing but consuming. We get a chapter on Isaac Newton, and the importance of action. Koperu-kun realizes how interconnected the world is through trade and industry. We are introduced to Koperu-kun's affluent friend Mizutani and his sister Katsuko, a great character, and get a lengthy chapter on Napoleon, because why not? However, the most compelling portion of the story for me, quite aptly, is the climax, when Kitami is confronted outside on a snowy day by some senior students that have long considered him rebellious. Having anticipated the danger of things turning physical with these older students belonging to the judo club, so you know they're strong, the group of friends had swore a pact to each other that they would stand up to the seniors together and let the cards fall as they may. If they were to get beaten up, they promised to do so together. Seeing Urakawa and Mizutani rush over to defend Kitami, Kopuru-kun knows that if he is to go and stand with them, he must do it then, but he can't bring himself to. He's too scared. Even when the older student calls out for any other friends of Kitami who may wish to defend him to come forward, Kopuru-kun just stands there and witnesses his friends be pummeled by the older students for daring to stand up to them. Despite being a mere schoolyard scuffle, it was quite the somber moment to read. After the other students go back inside the school, Kopuru-kun watches as his three friends pick each other up and console each other, and realizes that by doing nothing, he has done something terrible. Though beaten and bruised, they kept their promise to each other. They now share a camaraderie, of which Kopuru-kun is not party to, and he watches as they limp towards the school building, only Urakawa glancing back to give Kopuru-kun a look of pity. They leave him standing in the falling snow, alone. Kopuru-kun subsequently goes home and falls ill with a cold. He begins to know true regret, and wishes that his cold would get worse and kill him, so that perhaps then his three friends would understand and forgive his betrayal. Kopuru-kun is absent from school for a couple of weeks, during which time he stews in regret at his own cowardice. He attempts to think up excuses as to why he didn't join them, but realizes that none are believable, and even if they were to believe him, making such excuses would only be further betraying his friends. Kopuru-kun eventually opens up to his uncle about the situation, and his uncle advises that he write a letter to apologize as soon as possible. Kopuru-kun rejects this idea when his uncle tells him that there is no guarantee that he will be forgiven, and for the only time in the book, his uncle grows impatient and scolds him, discarding his until now often used and admirable moniker, calling him by his real name, Junichi. Ultimately, Kopuru-kun realizes that his uncle is right, and pens the letter to Kitami, asking him to show it to the other two boys. On another day, while Kopuru-kun is still at home and eagerly awaiting a reply to his letter of apology, his mother begins to tell him a story of how when she was just a girl, she was walking home from school one day. Her path always took her up some stone steps near a shrine, and on this particular day, when she reached them, there was an old lady of about 70, carrying a bag in one hand and holding an umbrella in the other, which she was using as a cane. Kopuru-kun's mother knew that she should offer to carry the bag for the old woman and help her up the cold stone stairs, but for some reason, every time she went to, it was like the opportunity to do so was gone. The old lady reached the top of the stairs herself, but for some reason, his mother tells Kopuru-kun, she still thinks about that old lady from time to time, and how immediately after she regretted not. And in what I consider the tenderest moment in the book, she adds, Junichi, I think that you may one day too have such an experience. Perhaps it may even be many times more painful than mine, causing much regret. His mother has obviously heard of the situation from Kopuru-kun's uncle, but she leaves enough room for plausible deniability, as Kopuru-kun finds tears welling up in his eyes. It is clear to the reader that he hasn't missed his mother's act of kindness either. The three friends show up to his house one day just as he is able to stand and walk around. Kopuru-kun feels a weight come off of his shoulders the moment they begin talking. It's clear that things are going to be okay between them. They let him know that they couldn't visit him until now due to the fallout from that snowy day. Parents complaining to teachers, teachers lecturing students, and Kitami's father going so far as to pull him from school until the heat died down. And just like that, things are all peachy. Kopuru-kun is forgiven. For me, it is this arc that defines Kimitachi wa dou ikiru ka. If I were asked to describe the book in limited words, I would simply say that it is a book full of love. What better way to describe a father's dying wish for his son to be a fine person, for an uncle and mother's words of advice, for the forgiveness and understanding of friends. I don't feel like it would be going too far to say it embodies a love for humanity, with Genzaburo Yoshino clearly trying to impart some wisdom to readers and make the world a better place for it, and attempting to do so is deemed valuable in itself. Kopuru-kun's uncle lets him know several times throughout the book that gaining such understanding takes time. Emphasis is put on careful thought and the search for answers. Just as in real life, events that happen to us can take time to mentally digest, and we may be confronted with things we lack the experience or maturity to understand, as is explained to Kopuru-kun when his uncle recounts a memory he has of his older sister trying and failing to explain the motion of the planets to him when he was a young boy. Kopuru-kun asks his uncle when it was that he came to understand, and without embarrassment, he states that it wasn't until some time after. Later, Kopuru-kun's uncle finally gives him the notebook full of the notes he had written for him. In the final moments of the book, Kopuru-kun uses a new notebook that his mother bought him, and begins writing his own journal entries addressed to his uncle. He tells his uncle that he has read the notebook that he received from him over and over, and although there are many things that are still a little difficult for him, he says that he reads it carefully, without skimming it. He writes to his uncle that he has begun to know that he must be a good person, and finishes by stating that he wants to be a person who helps the people of the world be friends with each other. An omnipresent narrator steps in to tell us, Kopuru-kun became able to live while thinking in this manner. For the time being, this long, long story ends here. And that has been the goal the entire time. A perspective, a mode of operating, a philosophy. Although it is only the beginning of Kopuru-kun's life, he has obtained something great, something that not everyone obtains. The narrator continues, although at this point it is clear that Genzaburo Yoshino is speaking directly to the readers. Wielding the full weight of the beautiful story that has just unfolded, in the final lines of the book he writes, "And now finally, I think there is something that I want to ask you all. How will you live?" I'd be lying if I said it didn't have an effect on me, even though I'd anticipated it being the final line of the book ever since reading its title. I mean, he said the thing. But I can only call it an undeniable question, one I will be asking all my life. I'd like to take a few moments here to talk about the linguistic flexibility of the titular question, Kimitachi wa do ikiru ka? It consists of kimitachi, the plural you, do, how, and ikiru, the verb to live. In different contexts, it could easily be translated as any of the following. How do you live? How should you live? Or how will you live? This last one being how I interpreted the final lines of the book. I haven't read the English translation, so I'm not sure what Mr. Navasky went with, but the point is that Kimitachi wa do ikiru ka is all of these questions at once. As the book follows a young Kopuru-kun, it's very forward-facing. How will you live? As a reflective question, examining one's current situation, how do you live? Or, as Hayao Miyazaki was asked in an interview with the New York Times, Mr. Miyazaki, the title of your next film is How Do You Live? Will you give us the answer? In this context, I think the question is best taken as, how should a person live? To which Miyazaki responds, I am making this movie because I do not have the answer. So with all that said, my final question to you, dear viewer, is how do you plan on seeing the new Ghibli film? Because I would fly to Tokyo just to see it if I could. Instead, I'll probably just rewatch all the other Ghibli films, starting with The Wind Rises, and catch the international release of How Do You Live whenever it finds its way overseas. But anyway, thank you very much for watching and or listening this far, and I hope you'll watch any further videos I put out. There are plenty of other good Japanese books, and I plan to do videos on many of them, many of which are even untranslated. So if that sounds good to you, please subscribe. Catch you later. So, I'd like to apologize for the clickbait title and thumbnail. If I'm honest with you, I don't really want to do that kind of thing, but I'm trying to pull viewers here. Although, if you've watched this far, I think it's safe to say you're probably not in the watches funny face thumbnail videos all day category. Anyway, I think I have something good to offer. and hopefully in the future I'll be in a place where I don't feel compelled to clickbait and can give you some nice clean videos, like pure straight my brain to yours. If that sounds like something you want to see, then please support the channel by subscribing, and of course liking and commenting goes a long way. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.